retaliation.
All right, I want to bring in our panel. Chris, thanks for the reporting. Back with us, Fawad Ajami, also Christopher Dickey. Also joining us is Christopher Preble, Vice President of Defense and Foreign Policy Studies at the Cato Institute, and retired Marine General Anthony Zinni, former Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Central Command. Appreciate all of you being with us. General Zinni, let's start with you. The Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dempsey, said that there was no military downside to waiting until Congress returned to session next week to take action. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think it was just covered in your piece. The targeting is ongoing. The assets are there to follow any actions he may take to move targets. There are plenty of fixed targets that can't be moved. And I don't think it's a problem for the military to do major damage to the Syrian forces when the time comes, even if it's later.
And General, what's your biggest concern about this military action? What are the things you're looking at that would concern you most as a planner?
Well, I'll tell you. Let me tell you what my concern is, because it's way bigger than just this act. You know, we're at a point in time in our history when we need to decide what our power and purpose is in the world. Ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, I don't think we've understood where we are in the world, what we want to be, what we can afford to be. And, you know, what are we going to be the world's policeman? Are we going to form new international groupings that we could lead? I'm listening to our political leaders that have the range from interventionists to isolationists. I think this is a moment, if this debate is going to happen between the executive and the legislative branches, to come to grips at what are we going to be in the 21st century? What is America's role? As a military man, that impacts directly our military. We've just come out of 2 wars. You know, we've been tasked to rebuild societies that are still in the 9th or 18th century in our image. We're suffering through sequestering. We're getting new missions, pivoting in the Pacific and everything else. Our military wants to know, what do you want us to be, and will you give us the capability to be that?
Chris Preble, you think launching military operations against Syria would be reckless and counterproductive for the United States. Why?
Mainly because I think the military mission has not been very well articulated, and the leading advocates for intervention, the hawks, if you will, are very explicit on this point. They do not want the mission to be limited. They understand the American people are overwhelmingly opposed to a war, especially a war that might spiral like the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan did, but that is not going to be enough for them. They will not stop at that. They will continue to call for greater and greater escalation, and so for them, this is just the first salvo in what they think and they hope is a much more concerted effort by the United States to intervene in the Syrian civil war.
Fawad, when you hear, okay, the United Arab Emirates is going to allow a base to be used or something, I mean, there's a lot of people, and again, I hear from them all day long on Twitter, who say, why is America the one who's the policeman of the world here yet again on this thing? I mean, okay, France wants to be involved, but where are these other Arab countries? Where are other countries in the region?
You're absolutely right, and the people who write into you have a very, very compelling point. We have been tasked, if you will, we have been left with the burden of attending to the pathologies of the Arab world. And I think that's the American moment and the American burden and the American destiny at this time. And I think when you take a look at the Arab world, there is something very disgraceful going on there. We do have the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia committed to this effort against Bashar. They want to see the end of Bashar. They have pledged money, they have pledged support, and they want to see the destruction of the Alawi mafia that rules Syria. But other Arab countries are really, when you think of it, it's completely reprehensible. The Egyptians, 90 million people who have had their own revolution for liberty are now siding with Bashar al-Assad against the rebellion in Syria. And then above and beyond that, you have the Iraqis whose liberty is owed to an American war. They now don't want to see an American intervention in Syria that would deliver some deliverance, some redemption to the Syrian people. Look, things in the Arab world are not good. They haven't been good for a long time, and America is entangled in these evils. But we're not going to go into a big war in Syria. Our help could, in a way, alter the balance of power on the ground without a major effort on our part. That's the hope, at least.
But if I may, what if it doesn't? What if it doesn't alter the balance of power? Then what? There will be calls, there have already been calls for the United States to intervene more decisively on the side of the Assad opposition. Who is that exactly? It's no wonder that the American people, after having been entangled, as Mr. Ajami says, in the Middle East, do not wish to become entangled again. I'm grateful. I'm surprised a bit that the President went to Congress, but it is, after all, Congress's responsibility to represent the wishes of their constituents, and I don't think anyone should be surprised that the American people are not anxious to become more deeply entangled in yet another civil war in the region.
Christopher Dickey, do you think this will escalate, that we will get pulled deeper into the Syrian crisis?
I really don't think there's any question at all. I mean, you know, I have lived through many of these punitive raids on Arab countries. In Libya, I was also in Kosovo and in Belgrade when it was getting bombed. And I see how it plays out. It's all very symbolic until there's a moment of just a massive war effort. In Kosovo, it was all done from the air. Of course, in Iraq, it was done on the ground. I don't see any potential for any kind of limited raid to really make a real difference on the ground. But I do see a huge potential for Assad to turn around and say, I survived, and you know what I'm going to do now? I'm going to use chemical weapons again. And what are you going to do about it? That's the easiest thing for him to do, and I think it's almost certain that that's what he will do.
And General Zinni, if that does happen, what then?
Well, what concerns me is not only that he can use it again, and then we've got to repeat this with no end in sight and no strategy and no clear political objectives, but even if Assad is overthrown and this mixed bag of opposition groups come pouring into Damascus, what does that mean? I mean, there's an aftermath in here that could be even worse than what we see. We keep saying no boots on the ground. We had two administrations, the first Bush administration and the Clinton administration, that did not want to put boots on the ground in Iraq. And I think successfully contained Saddam and avoided the mess. And then suddenly, everything for two administrations that we decided we wouldn't do, we suddenly were immersed in trying to rebuild that nation and into a mess we didn't understand. This is a religious war in many aspects, an ethnic, a tribal war. We've taken sides now. And this mess, as I think was pointed out, can lead to involvement in Egypt and elsewhere in the region. And I don't see anybody else doing anything more than just holding our coat in this.
Fouad, just very briefly, you're more supportive of the opposition.
Well, look, we have to believe in people. We have to believe that they have something in them, a goodness in them, a desire for freedom. We have to believe something that apparently General Zinni does not believe. We have to believe that the Syrian people are capable of spawning a regime of much greater mercy, much greater humanity than the regime of Bashar al-Assad. And that's what's been missing for the last 2.5 years. That's why we didn't intervene. That's why we didn't arm them, because we didn't trust them. We must trust them, otherwise we shouldn't do this whole thing.
All right, well, we've got to leave it there. Fouad Ajami, Christopher Dickey, Christopher Preble, General Anthony Zinni, I appreciate all of your perspectives. Thank you very much.